Hi everyone! Today's video is all about estimating fractions. And we already know that estimating is helpful because it allows us to make a smart, thoughtful guess about our answer. This is going to allow us to see if when we're adding or subtracting, our final answer is reasonable. And we can use something called benchmark fractions to help us check this. Benchmark fractions are just friendly or very common fractions that will allow us to get close to our actual answer. So if I look at a number line from 0 to 1, believe it or not, both 0 and 1 are benchmark numbers that we can use. We can use 0 when we have a very small fraction because we could round that amount down to 0. If we have a fraction that is really, really close to 1 whole, we could also use the benchmark of 1. Or if we're working with a mixed number, we could bump it up to the next whole amount. The next most common benchmark fraction is 1/2. We work with 1/2 a lot, and it's pretty easy to tell if a fraction is close to 1/2 by looking at how the numerator compares to the denominator. You might also use the benchmark fractions 1/4 and 3/4. I like to think about these kind of like money. So if I'm looking at this number line and pretending it's going from $0 to $1, I would have 1/4 or 1/4 as my first benchmark, then 1/2 or 2/4 as my middle benchmark, and finally 3/4 or 3/4 as my next benchmark before I get to my full dollar. So to estimate fractions, we just have to go through 3 quick checks. So the first question we would ask ourselves is, are our numerator and denominator about the same? If they are, and the answer to this question is yes, we should round that fraction to 1 whole. Because when the numerator and the denominator are about the same number, that means we have almost as many pieces as it takes to make up 1 whole. So that means we would round it to 1. But if the answer to that question is no, we would move on to our second check, which is to ask, is our numerator about half of the denominator? So for example, if I have the fraction 4/7, I know that half of 7 is 3/2. 4 is about 3/2. So if the answer to that question is yes, I would round my fraction to 1/2. Because when our numerator is about half our denominator, that means we're going to be really close to 1/2. If the answer to this question is no, we move on to our final of those 3 checks, which is to either round the fraction to 0 or to try another benchmark. Most often this year in 5th grade, if you aren't rounding to 1 or rounding to 1/2, you'll be rounding down to 0. A time when that would come up would be if your numerator and your denominator are really far apart. Because if you only have 1 out of 8 pieces, for example, that means you aren't really that close to filling up that hole. You're actually closer to not having anything. So let's take a look at a couple examples, because this is always more helpful to look at with actual fractions. Let's say I have the fraction 2/5, and I want to see what 2/5 is pretty close to. I'll go through those 3 quick checks. So the first check is, are my numerator and my denominator about the same? Well, big picture, 2 and 5 are not really that close together. 2 doesn't almost fill up an entire circle split into 5 pieces. So I would say the answer to check number 1 is no. So now I'll move on to check number 2, which is my numerator about half of my denominator? Well, half of 5 is 2/2. I could also think about this like, if I multiply the numerator times 2, do I get close to my denominator? 2 times 2 is 4, which is pretty close to 5. So I would say my answer to check number 2 is yes, which means I should round that fraction to 1/2. So 2/5 is about 1/2. Let's take a look at 6/7. With check number 1, I ask myself, is my numerator and denominator about the same? Well, 6 is only 1 away from 7, so I would say my answer to check number 1 is yes, which means 6/7 would get rounded to 1, or about 1 whole. What about 3/11? When I check through those, I'm looking first to see if my numerator and my denominator are about the same. 3 and 11 are not very close together, so I would say no to that one and move on to check number 2. Then I need to look and see, is my numerator about half of my denominator? Or if I multiply my numerator by 2, do I get really close to my denominator? Well, 3 times 2 is 6, and that's pretty far away from 11, so I would say no to check number 2. Now I'll look at check number 3, which is to round the fraction to 0 or try another benchmark. 3 and 11 are pretty far apart from each other, so I'm pretty confident that I could round this to 0. You could also use the benchmark 1/4 because 3/12 is exactly 1/4. Now this also works with mixed numbers too. For example, let's say I had 2 and 6/7. I already know that the fractional part, 6/7, is pretty close to 1 because the numerator and the denominator are about the same. So that means 2 and 6/7 would be about 2 plus 1 extra, which means I would bump this mixed number to say it's about 3. Let's take a look at how you might see this in a word problem. So again, I'll put that number line up with my benchmark fractions, and we'll look at this example. It says, this past summer, Tucker was learning to swim. On Monday, he swam for 1 2/8 hours. On Tuesday, he swam for 5/9 hours. About how many hours did he swim on Monday and Tuesday? Okay, so this is a true story because this summer I have been teaching my dog Tucker how to swim. So I can very easily picture this, and I can see him spending some different time at the pool. So the first sentence says, this summer, Tucker was learning to swim. Well, this is a picture of my dog Tucker in the pool at my parents' house learning how to swim. On Monday, he swam for 1 2/8 hours. So that means I'll write down that on Monday, it was 1 2/8 hours of time. Then the next sentence tells me, on Tuesday, he swam for 5/9 hours. Well, because I read the whole question and I know it's asking me for the amount total, I know that I'd be adding those 5/9 hours to the Monday's 1 2/8. Finally, the question sentence asks, about how many hours did he swim on Monday and Tuesday? So I want to know what it's about. When I see that word about, I know I'm estimating. I don't have to find the exact answer. So I'll go through those 3 checks in my head. In 1 2/8 hours, I need to first look and see, are 2 and 8 really close together? They're not, so I would say that that's not close to another full hour. Then I would check and see, is 2 and 1/8 related to each other because my numerator is half my denominator. Well, half of 8 is 4, and 2 isn't 4, so I would say that's probably not really close to 1/2. 2 and 8 are kind of far apart from each other, so I could either round that down to be equal to 0, or you might have recognized that 2/8 was equal to 1/4. So Monday is about 1 hour, or you could say about 1 1/4 hours of swimming time. Either one of those would be acceptable. Now on Tuesday, 5 and 9 are not basically the same number, so I would say that's not equal to 1 full hour. But if I multiply 5 times 2, I get 10. That is pretty close to 2 times as big, or in other words, 5 is about half of 9, so I would say that Tuesday is pretty close to a half an hour of swimming time. So to find my final sum, I would add together 1 plus 1/2, or if you rounded to 1 1/4 for Monday, 1 1/4 plus 1/2, which tells me that Tucker swam for about 1 1/2 or 1 3/4 hours on Monday and Tuesday. Now I wanted to put both of these examples here because it's important to remember that when we're estimating, it's okay to have a slightly different answer than someone else. Both of these answers would be reasonable and acceptable answers. You just estimated a little bit differently for Monday, but both of them would have been close. So when we use benchmark fractions, remember we're rounding down to 0, up to 1 whole, or using the benchmark fractions 1/4, 1/2, and 3/4 to help us get a close, reasonable answer. Thanks for watching, and I can't wait to do more practice with you.